It is June 1944. The air over Normandy is thick, not just with the salt spray of the English Channel, but with the suffocating smell of cordite and burning fuel. The greatest invasion in history, Operation Overlord, has cracked the German defenses, yet the advance inland is a slow, grinding slaughter. Every hedgerow, every tiny French village, is a kill zone. This is the stage for our story. A conflict where the scale of industrial war dwarfed the individual, yet where the individual's choice held the power of a kinetic strike. The grand strategic picture saw the Allies deploying an overwhelming tide of steel and manpower. The M4 Sherman tank, the ubiquitous, reliable workhorse of the American armored divisions. By the summer of 1944, the production lines in Detroit, in Lima, in dozens of factories across the American industrial heartland, were churning out these 30-ton behemoths at a pace that Germany could only dream of. The numbers are staggering. By the end of the war, over 49,000 Shermans of all variants would roll off the lines. An industrial feat, a logistical miracle. But to the average German grenadier digging in near Caen, the Sherman was simply a relentless, armored apparition, a harbinger of doom, its 75mm main gun coughing lethal smoke. Yet this story begins not with the thunder of the guerre totale, but with a hushed moment in a sun-dappled barn, far behind the immediate lines of contact. The setting is rural, seemingly untouched by the strategic calculus of Eisenhower and Rommel. It is here we meet Elodie, a woman whose life has been reduced to the simple, stark arithmetic of survival under occupation. The irony of this war is relentless. While entire cities are pulverized by strategic bombers like the Avro Lancaster or the B-17 Flying Fortress, the survival of a single soldier, a single spy, a single piece of tactical intelligence can often be decided by a frayed length of gauze and a drop of antiseptic. Elodie, like many French citizens, walked a perilous line. Any aid to an Allied soldier was a death sentence under German military law. Yet, the sight of a suffering man cuts across all banners and ideologies. One night, a shadow falls across her threshold. A man, bleeding, disoriented. He is no ordinary GI. His uniform is tattered, but his movements suggest a purpose beyond that of a mere frontline infantryman.
He is part of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, a precursor to modern intelligence agencies, and his specialization is the most dangerous kind: deep reconnaissance and the establishment of local resistance networks. His name, for the purposes of our account, is Lieutenant Miller. His mission had failed, his patrol decimated. His radio, his link to the technological power of the West, was shattered.
He was now a ghost in the occupied territory, hunted by the highly efficient, often brutal German military police, Feldgendarmerie. Miller's wound was serious, a deep laceration from shrapnel. Gangrene in the summer heat was a ticking clock. Elodie's choice was immediate, non-negotiable by conscience. She chose kindness. She sterilized her instruments, a grim process under the circumstances, and cleaned his wound, dressing it with material saved from a long-ago household kit. She asked for nothing. "I did it because he was in pain, monsieur, not because of his flag," based on historical accounts of civilian aid to isolated Allied troops. The strategic and technological implications of this intimate moment are massive, though neither of them knew it then. Miller, once recovered, carried not just the scar of his wound, but an indelible, profound debt. He carried something else too, a critical piece of intelligence about a hidden German fuel depot, a vital logistical node supplying the Panzer IV and Tiger Beamer tanks, defending a key choke point known as Hill 112. This depot, meticulously camouflaged, had been a strategic blind spot for Allied aerial intelligence. The vast resources poured into the invasion, the radar, the electronic countermeasures, the colossal photographic reconnaissance efforts flown by modified Spitfires, had missed this one small, crucial flaw in the German supply chain. Miller, while convalescing, had overheard German supply sergeants complaining about the endless fuel demands, tracing the route of the trucks to a specific set of coordinates, disguised as an agricultural cooperative. And so, the stage is set for the great irony we shall explore. The immense industrial and military machinery of the Allied forces capable of launching 156,000 men onto a hostile beach, would soon be redirected by the simple, unpaid debt incurred in a quiet barn. The cost of a single act of mercy would be measured in thousands of gallons of burning fuel and the fate of an entire armored engagement. If this deep dive into the human and technological stakes of World War II interests you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Your support helps us uncover more of these forgotten, powerful stories of the war. Lieutenant Miller, having recovered enough to travel, began the long, treacherous journey back to Allied lines. His body was sustained by Elodie's care, his mind by the urgency of the intelligence he carried. This chapter pivots from the quiet drama of the barn to the cold, hard logic of strategic supply and armored warfare. The success of any campaign in 1944, particularly the push through Normandy, was a battle of logistics, an equation solved with steel, rubber, and high-octane gasoline. The German defense, particularly their formidable armored divisions, equipped with the fearsome Tiger I and the later Tiger II, Königstiger, relied heavily on the concept of Schwerpunkt, point of main effort. These tanks, though fewer in number than the Allied Shermans, boasted superior armor, up to 100 mm on the front of the Tiger Y, and the devastating 80 mm KWK-36 main gun, giving them a decisive advantage at long range. A German Tiger could reliably dispatch 4 or 5 Shermans before the American tanks could close the distance for an effective flank shot. This inherent technological superiority was what kept the Allied advance bogged down. However, the Achilles heel of the German armored force was not the armor, but the fuel. The Maybach HL-230 P-30 engine of the Tiger. I was notoriously thirsty, consuming fuel at an astronomical rate, especially off-road. Furthermore, the German synthetic fuel production was under constant massive attack by Allied strategic bombers. Every liter of fuel was precious, every depot a strategic target. Miller's intelligence, detailing the exact location of the hidden fuel cache disguised as a farm, was a weapon more potent than a whole squadron of bombers. Once safely behind Allied lines, his debriefing was immediate. The chain of command, from the regimental intelligence officer up to General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group, recognized the value instantly. This was not merely another target. It was an opportunity to sever a critical artery, supplying the panzers defending the crucial high ground. The operational plan was designated Operation Vengeance, a fittingly dramatic title for a mission rooted in both strategic necessity and a personal debt. It required a surgical strike, not a general bombardment. General bombing runs were too imprecise and risked alerting the enemy. A deep penetration armored reconnaissance mission was required, led by the very unit that produced the man saved by Elodie's kindness, the 2nd Armored Division, known as Hell on Wheels. The unit selected was a task force built around the latest variant of the ubiquitous American tank, the M4A376W Sherman. This model represented the technological response to the German armored threat. Its key upgrade was the high-velocity 76mm M1 gun, which, while still struggling against the Tiger's frontal armor, gave the Sherman a much better chance at penetrating its sides and rear than the older 75mm gun. Crucially, this variant also featured a wet stowage system for its ammunition, significantly reducing the catastrophic rate of internal fires, the infamous Ronson-Leiter reputation of the earlier Shermans. The Germans had the superior machine, no question, writes Major General Maurice Rose in his papers, but we had the superior industrial muscle. We could lose 5 Shermans and roll out 10 more. They lost 1 Tiger, and it took them weeks to replace the gun barrel, let alone the chassis. The war was turning into an economic calculation disguised as a firefight. The task force included 4 M4A3 76W Shermans, supported by M3 half-tracks, carrying a platoon of armored infantry and engineers, all tasked with reaching the depot, confirming the intelligence, and then destroying it. The total distance to the target was 60 miles behind the current line of contact, through territory heavily patrolled by German motorized infantry. The irony of this technological application, driven by a single human debt, is palpable. The colossal engine of American industry, designed to win the war through sheer brute force production, was now acting as a personal delivery service for retribution and gratitude. This was not just a mission to destroy fuel. It was the mechanism by which Lieutenant Miller would pay back the woman who asked for nothing. A debt so profound it required the delivery of overwhelming protective steel to her doorstep. The mission was a gamble, but the strategic reward, neutralizing the German armored defense at a critical juncture, was worth the immense risk. The operation was now moving from planning to execution, guided by a sense of urgency and a very specific personal destination. The date is late July 1944. The armored column moves under the oppressive darkness of a new moon, attempting to become ghosts within enemy territory. The challenge is immense, moving 4 30-ton M4A3 76W Shermans, which stand almost 9 feet tall, undetected through a network of narrow, winding European roads. The strategic doctrine for this type of deep penetration was based on speed and immediate, overwhelming aggression should they be discovered. Each Sherman carried a basic combat load of around 71 rounds, a combination of high explosive, HE, and armor-piercing, AP, rounds. The tank commanders, veterans of the earlier brutal fighting in the Bocage, knew the terrain was deadly, perfect for German ambush tactics utilizing the Panzerfaust, a cheap, highly effective anti-tank weapon that turned any hedgerow into a sudden source of terror for the crews inside the steel coffins. The lead tank, nicknamed the Reckoning, was commanded by a young, determined Captain Hayes, handpicked for this mission because of his aggressive yet methodical approach to reconnaissance. His orders were absolute: protect Miller, who was acting as the navigator and the single source of critical intelligence. Hayes understood the core of the mission was paradoxical: to be a ghost on the move, but a force of absolute destruction when necessary. The column used every technological and tactical advantage they possessed. Radio silence was strictly enforced, relying instead on hand signals and low-powered short-range radio intercoms between the tank crews, the SCR 508 system, to communicate only the most immediate threats. The infantry rode the tanks, a controversial but common tactic, acting as the eyes and ears, especially in the thick hedgerow country where the Sherman crews had severely limited visibility through their narrow vision slits and periscopes. The first major hurdle arrived near a river crossing, a small stone bridge marked on Miller's map as a potential German checkpoint. The river's murmur was the only sound for miles, Captain Hayes later recalled in his after-action report. But you could feel the German presence, the coil spring of their defensive posture ready to snap. Instead of a head-on assault, the team executed a classic armored flanking maneuver. The engineers dismounted and, utilizing captured German teller mines to mask their movements, crept toward the bridge. They discovered it was indeed manned by a small garrison, 2 POC-47. 5 anti-tank guns already sighted on the main approach road, supported by a platoon of German infantry equipped with MG-42 machine guns, the notorious Hitler's buzzsaw, known for its devastating rate of fire, up to 1,500 rounds per minute. The fight was swift and brutal. The Shermans did not cross the bridge. They simply opened fire from concealed positions in the tree line, using high-explosive shells to eliminate the anti-tank gun crews before they could even locate the source of the attack. This action, a calculated act of violence to ensure the strategic goal, emphasized the high-stakes cost of Elodie's kindness. The debt demanded absolute ruthlessness against anyone who stood in the way of its repayment. After bypassing the bridge, the column faced the constant psychological strain of moving through enemy territory. Every shadow, every distant vehicle sound, amplified the fear of a sudden, decisive German counterattack. The German High Command, even without knowing the exact mission, would have immediately detected a large, unauthorized column moving behind their lines. The clock was ticking. Meanwhile, back at the German depot, supply sergeants were methodically offloading fuel drums, oblivious to the technological arrow heading directly for their heart. The camouflage was so effective that even routine German aerial patrols failed to register it as a priority target. This failure of German aerial reconnaissance, a sector severely hampered by the Allied air superiority, or JBO, fighter bomber threat, was a critical enabling factor for Operation Vengeance. The psychological toll on the American tank crews was immense. Inside the steel hull, the noise of the engine, the smell of diesel and sweat, The constant, jolting movement combined to create a state of high-alert sensory deprivation. They were fighting two battles, the external war against the Germans and the internal war against fatigue and fear. The only thing tethering them to the objective was Miller's unwavering confidence in his intelligence and the shared, unstated understanding that this mission was about more than just fuel. It was about a promise. Dawn found the American column less than 2 miles from the target coordinates. The camouflaged fuel depot, or what Miller knew as the Agricultural Cooperative. The advance was now agonizingly slow, conducted only by the deep, heavy sound of the Sherman tracks grinding over the earth, their steel treads kicking up plumes of red dust. The nature of the target demanded a specific approach. It wasn't a fortified bunker, it was a logistical choke point, highly flammable, but likely lightly defended, relying almost entirely on its disguise. The German military mindset, focused on massive, intimidating armor and static defense, often underestimated the value of securing their rear echelon supplies against deep strike armor raids. This was the precise flaw Miller was exploiting. Intelligence gathered from local Maquis resistance fighters, signaled via prearranged dropping points, confirmed the depot was protected by only a single platoon of Luftwaffe Field Division personnel, troops typically used for garrison duties, not experienced anti-tank warfare. They were armed with standard Kar-98K rifles and a few light machine guns. Against 4 M4A376W Shermans, this was a suicide defense. Captain Hayes ordered the armored infantry to dismount and create a wide security perimeter, their objective being to neutralize all sentries and prevent any single runner from reaching a communications wire or radio set. The priority was not a prolonged firefight, but swift, decisive incapacitation. The timing was critical. If the Germans managed to transmit a message about an armored incursion, the nearest panzer division, likely elements of the fearsome Panzer Lehr, could be scrambled, and the Americans would face a counterattack they could not survive. The attack went off exactly at 07 hours. The Shermans burst from the cover of a dense wood line, their 70-60-meter guns immediately engaging the disguised structures. The first rounds were high-explosive anti-tank, heat, specifically designed to maximize fire and secondary explosions against soft targets. The disguised sheds and barns immediately vaporized in blasts of smoke and orange flame, confirming the location of the fuel drums. The subsequent rounds were directed at the German barracks and guard post. The whole world went yellow and black, one of the German prisoners later described. We thought we were safe. We were a farm, yes? Then the noise, like the sound of God beating a drum. And the fuel drums, they started to pop like corn, but bigger, and with the smell of hell. The tactical brilliance of the strike was its speed. Within 7 minutes, the depot was engulfed in a massive conflagration. The heat was so intense, it warped the armor plating on the Shermans that were positioned too close. The immediate tactical goal of Operation Vengeance was achieved. The German fuel depot was a smoking wreck. A critical supply point for the armored defense of the German position was gone. The strategic impact would be felt days later in the immobilization and subsequent rout of German tanks at a key battle. But for Lieutenant Miller, the mission was only half complete. He had paid his debt to the war effort. Now he had to pay his debt to Elodie. The column did not immediately retreat. Instead, Miller directed Captain Hayes to the coordinates of the small secluded farm where Elodie lived. A route that was entirely unnecessary for the strategic retreat, adding immense risk to the entire force. Hayes, a disciplined officer, questioned the order. "Lieutenant, our mission is complete. The strategic imperative is to get this steel back to our lines. We do not engage in personal errands behind enemy lines." Miller's response was the core of this narrative. "Captain, this mission only exists because of this woman. We are here to destroy the Germans and keep moving. We are going to destroy a little more, and then we are leaving. The immense industrial and technological might of the United States, the $50,000 cost of a single Sherman, the thousands of engineering man-hours, the logistical planning of an entire army group, was about to be diverted for a matter of personal honor. The cold logic of war was meeting the unpredictable, warm logic of the human heart. The stage was set for the final, most improbable encounter of the mission. The arrival of the steel giant at the door of the woman who used nothing more than a simple bandage. The Sherman tank, the Reckoning, arrived at Elodie's farm 2 days after the depot destruction. The column had utilized side roads, moving at a reduced pace to conserve fuel and avoid detection. The constant low thrum of the Continental R975C1 radial engine, a pervasive sound of mechanical menace and power. The area was quiet. The recent massive explosion at the fuel depot had already drawn the attention of the nearest German forces, but they were searching miles away, closer to the source of the blast. Elodie's farm was isolated, a cluster of stone buildings surrounded by fields of grain. She heard the tanks before she saw them, a sound unlike anything she had ever known, a sound that spoke of unbridled industrial power. She emerged from her house not in fear, but in stunned apprehension, seeing the silhouette of the massive machine emerge from the early morning mist. A Sherman M4A376W is an imposing sight. Standing over 7 meters tall, its 76mm gun dominating the turret, it represented the exact opposite of the quiet, personal life she led. It was a machine of war, a symbol of the immense scale of the conflict that had swallowed her country. The hatch of the Reckoning opened with a metallic sigh, and Lieutenant Miller emerged, covered in dust, exhaustion etched onto his face. He jumped down to the ground. The moment of recognition was immediate, a powerful silence replacing the mechanical roar of the tank. "Elodie," Miller simply said, a word that carried the weight of the entire mission. He did not offer her money, which she would have refused. He did not offer her supplies, which were scarce. He offered her the only thing a soldier in 1944 could truly offer, security and the ability to choose her future. Miller quickly explained the situation. The German forces would soon discover that the local population must have supplied intelligence leading to the depot's destruction. Any citizen living near the main artery, particularly one known for isolated kindness, would be a prime target for the Gestapo or the Feldgendarmerie retaliation patrols. The price of her kindness would be her life. He delivered the debt in the form of a tactical proposition. "We are taking you out, Elodie. Now. We are leaving a tank with you. This one." Captain Hayes, standing next to the tank, finally understood the complete, staggering scope of his mission. Miller was not simply showing gratitude. He was exercising a profound strategic duty to protect the source of critical intelligence and a moral duty to save the woman who saved him. The ultimate irony of the technological age was revealed here. A 30-ton, $50,000 instrument of war was being used as an armored evacuation vehicle. Miller instructed the tank crew, all hardened veterans, "You are responsible for this woman's safety until we reach the main divisional staging area. She rides inside the turret." The idea of a civilian riding in the claustrophobic, deafening turret of a Sherman was unheard of, a breach of every regulation. But in the heat of war, the highest-ranking officer on the scene makes the call. Elodie was quickly loaded into the tight space, nestled amongst the radio equipment and the massive breech block of the 76mm gun, a tiny figure surrounded by 5 inches of rolled, hardened steel. The journey back was a desperate dash, punctuated by the thunderous sound of the engine and the constant fear of interception. For Elodie, the experience was a sensory overload. The smell of oil and gunpowder, the jarring ride, the metallic clatter of the tracks, all contained within a shell designed to repel explosive force. This machine, built for destruction, had become her ultimate protector. This sequence is the thematic climax. The personal debt, incurred with a simple bandage, has been repaid with the delivery of the ultimate technological power, a weapon transformed into a life raft. The cold calculation of the industrial war effort has been briefly, momentarily hijacked by a passionate act of human gratitude. The armored column was finally detected 20 miles from Allied lines. The signal was picked up by a German radio monitoring station, and the nearest available combat unit was scrambled. A section of the elite 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, Goetz von Berlichingen, led by 2 deadly Panther AUSF, tanks. The Panther was arguably the finest tank produced by any nation during the war. Weighing 45 tons, it mounted the high-velocity 7.5 cm KWK-42 L-70 gun, capable of penetrating the frontal armor of a Sherman at extreme ranges, over 2,000 yards. Its sloped frontal armor, up to 80 mm angled at 55 degrees, made it virtually impervious to the Sherman's 76 mm gun, except at close range and perfect angle. This was the ultimate technological challenge for the American crews. The confrontation took place in an open field near a small forest, where the advantage lay squarely with the longer-ranged German gun. Captain Hayes, recognizing the danger, immediately ordered the column to use the terrain. "We are not fighting an open duel. Flank speed. Find cover." The Shermans, though technologically inferior in armor and firepower, possessed a critical advantage: superior traverse speed of the turret and greater mechanical reliability. The Panther's complex interleaved road wheel system was prone to mud and mechanical failure, and its turret traverse was slower. The engagement began with the terrifying sound of the German 7.5 cm KWK-42 gun firing. The first shell missed the reckoning by a hair's breadth, the concussion rattling Elodie inside the turret. Hayes, knowing they could not win a long-range battle, executed a high-risk maneuver known as the flank gambit. He ordered 2 Shermans to fire smoke shells, white phosphorus, directly at the Panthers, blinding their gunners. Under the cover of the thick white smoke, the remaining 2 Shermans, including the Reckoning, began a rapid flanking maneuver, driving the Shermans to a distance of under 500 yards. At this extreme close range, the HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing, rounds from the 76 mm gun stood a chance of punching through the Panther's thinner side or rear armor. The duel was a terrifying example of the brutal mathematics of armored combat. A Sherman, positioned by Captain Hayes in a shallow ditch, took a direct hit to its transmission housing. The tank was instantly immobilized, but the crew, thanks to the wet stowage, survived the initial blast and continued to fight using its machine guns. Meanwhile, the Reckoning reached its firing position. The Panther, momentarily confused by the smoke and the immobilized Sherman, presented a brief, imperfect side view. The American gunner, a veteran named Sergeant Rourke, did not hesitate. He fired a single APT, armor-piercing tracer round. The 76 mm shell, traveling at over 2,600 feet per second, struck the Panther just above its road wheels, penetrating the side armor. The internal explosion ignited the main ammunition stowage. The resulting detonation blew the Panther's 6.5-ton turret completely off its ring. The second Panther, seeing the catastrophic loss of its comrade, began to reverse. The tactical victory was decisive, but the cost was 1 Sherman and 3 wounded men. The duel highlighted the sheer courage required of the American tank crews, who knew their tanks were vulnerable, but relied on aggressive tactics and superior numbers to overwhelm the technological advantage of the German armor. Inside the Reckoning, Elodie witnessed the war not as a distant strategic concept, but as a violent, immediate reality of fire and steel, a reality that only confirmed the urgency of her rescue. The human story was now inextricably linked to the technological narrative of the Sherman versus the Panther. The remaining 2 Shermans, their mission complete and their crews battered but intact, finally crossed back into Allied territory late that afternoon. The sight of the American infantry and the familiar M8 Greyhounds of the reconnaissance unit provided an overwhelming sense of relief. Elodie, emerging from the turret of the Reckoning, was immediately debriefed and treated by the medical staff. She had transitioned from a quiet civilian under occupation to a strategic intelligence asset and an accidental combat survivor, all within a week. Her survival was a testament to the fact that in total war, sometimes the most massive technological responses are triggered by the smallest, most ethical human choices. Lieutenant Miller, having repaid his debt and secured the critical source of intelligence, was recommended for a commendation. His story, however, was quickly absorbed into the vast, impersonal machine of the war effort. The destruction of the German fuel depot proved to be the key factor in the Battle of the Hills 3 days later. Immobilized and fuel-starved, the German armored counterattack was disjointed and lacked the necessary thrust. The Allied forces secured the high ground, a critical strategic objective that hastened the subsequent breakout. The ironies inherent in this entire sequence are profound. 1. Industrial gratitude. The single unselfish act of bandaging a stranger was repaid, not with a personal gift, but with the temporary deployment of a massive industrial product, a Sherman tank, worth a king's ransom and thousands of man-hours. 2. The hidden trigger. The immense technological power of the Allies, which could not find a critical German target through aerial surveillance and radar, was led directly to its destruction by the intimate knowledge gained by a wounded man in a barn. 3. The human shield. A machine designed to destroy and be destroyed became, for a brief critical window, a personal rescue capsule, prioritized over standard military objectives. The legacy of this moment extends far beyond the Normandy campaign. Elodie chose to remain with the Allied forces, using her intimate knowledge of the region to act as an interpreter and guide for the advancing troops, a direct and lasting consequence of her decision to help Miller. She became an unofficial, indispensable part of the intelligence infrastructure. The M4 Sherman itself, often derided by its own crews as a less-than-ideal machine compared to the German Panthers, was ultimately the true technological winner of the campaign. Not through superior firepower, but through superior reliability, maintainability, and, most importantly, mass production. The ability to deploy 4 Shermans against every one Panther or Tiger, and the logistical genius to get a single one to a specific location for a debt of honor, proved the ultimate strategic advantage. The war, at this level, was a brutal game of statistics, and the Sherman was the statistical champion. The story of the Bandaged and the tank remains a stark reminder. Behind every strategic victory, every line drawn on a map, every statistic on industrial production, there is an irreducible human element. An act of grace, a choice of kindness, can alter the trajectory of a tank column, the outcome of a battle, and the future of a continent. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the human elements that shaped World War II strategy. If you found this convergence of kindness and conflict compelling, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories where technological history meets personal destiny. The war machine rolled onward. The armored columns, refueled and reinforced, smashed through the German lines in the famed breakout from Normandy, culminating in the race across France. The fuel depot destroyed in Operation Vengeance was quickly forgotten by strategists, becoming a footnote in the massive logistical reports of the summer of 1944. Yet, for the individuals involved, the episode left an indelible, multifaceted mark. For the German forces, the loss of that fuel depot was, in retrospect, a profound failure of operational security and an early symptom of their ultimate defeat. They had underestimated the reach of Allied intelligence and the desperation of the Allied logistical push. The strategic implication was clear. The Allies could not only beat the German armor face to face, but they could reach deep behind the lines and choke the supply that made the formidable German tanks run. This technological vulnerability, the constant enormous fuel hunger of the panzer divisions, was exploited ruthlessly, turning their heaviest armor into expensive, immobile steel pillboxes. Lieutenant Miller continued his service with the OSS, his reputation cemented by the success of the mission and the uncanny accuracy of his intelligence. He understood, perhaps more than any other officer, the unique power of the local population and the human network of resistance. His experience shifted his focus from general reconnaissance to highly localized, intelligence-driven sabotage, a direct lesson learned from the simple act of being cared for by a French civilian. The debt was not just paid, it was weaponized into a strategy of precision. Elodie, the woman who risked her life for a stranger, never became a celebrated figure. She was, and remained, a symbol of the millions of ordinary citizens whose silent choices defined the character of the occupation and the liberation. Her contribution was not in firing a weapon or designing a tank, but in providing the most fundamental human resource, hope and safety. After the war, she returned to her farm, now a free woman, her life fundamentally altered by the momentary arrival of the American Steel Protector. The tank that saved her was eventually shipped back to the United States for refurbishment, its ultimate fate lost to the bureaucratic paper trails of the post-war military surplus. But the story of the Sherman itself endures as the greatest legacy of the event. The tank, which had once been dismissed in propaganda as weak, proved its worth not in individual duels, but in its ability to be where it needed to be, when it needed to be there. Its reliability and ease of repair meant that the American industrial machine could take a hit, absorb the damage, and keep coming. This specific Sherman, the Reckoning, demonstrated a truth deeper than armor thickness, that the strategic value of a piece of technology is ultimately defined by its ability to execute the mission, no matter how unorthodox. This document, this narrative, attempts to preserve that fragile, powerful connection between the massive scale of the war's technology, the $49,000 Sherman, the 80-kilometer gun, the colossal logistics train, and the single, quiet, human interaction. It is a story that proves the historical irony of war. While nations calculate victory in terms of divisions, tons of steel, and kill ratios, the spark that ignites the engine of destiny can often be found in the selfless action of an individual and a simple, blood-soaked bandage. The final image left to history is not of a massive military parade, but of a quiet Frenchwoman, standing in the dust, watching a column of American steel disappear, having delivered a debt, and in doing so, irrevocably changed the course of a campaign.